So what I'm going to talk about is just a little bit my journey. It's funny because you don't usually look back and talk about your past, but I guess that's what I'm going to do. But hopefully there'll be some lessons in here for all those who want to build successful businesses, and especially for people pitching tonight. Wish you the positive vibes to do really well. Okay, so a little bit about me. I've been in the software business 25 years, so an awful long time. And I was with, most recently, Duo Security. I was at Zendesk. I was COO there from when it was about 15 people to I think it's now like 2,000 people, and it's worth like almost $6 billion, which is sort of amazing. I was at MySQL, and I sometimes work as an advisor or board member with other companies, both in the Bay Area and in Michigan. So I've been pretty lucky. I've had $4 billion exits so far. That's counting Duo, which is at $1 billion valuation, but hasn't actually done its full exit, so to speak. And sometimes I run marathons, or at least I used to, and I play bass once in a while. Anyone here play bass or guitar or anything like that? A few people? Okay, anyone who put up their hand is way better than I am. And there's three kind of themes I'm going to talk about, or ask you to try to pay attention to. One is technology is cyclical. Two, every time there's a change, that's an opportunity. It's especially an opportunity for startups and entrepreneurs. And three, if you are so lucky as to find an underserved market, disruption is this hugely powerful force that you can use to your advantage. So one of the things that's kind of interesting, having been in the industry for a very long time, is you look back and you say, I remember when CPUs were at 1 megahertz on an Apple II computer, and this is a long time ago, or IBM PC. And you see these ridiculous accelerations of performance in every single metric, whether it's communication speed, memory, disk, etc. And sometimes people talk about Moore's law, where things get better, performance doubles every 2 years, something like that. Moore's law is kind of plateaued at this point. And it looks very smooth when you look back. But when you're in the moment, and especially when you're trying to figure out what kind of company to create, it's not so smooth. And those are things to pay attention to. And I kind of show or maybe I don't, yeah. So, this is the NASDAQ curve. And you remember that time? That was a great time to actually start a company. Not a good time to sell a company, but a good time to create a company. So up front, it's not so smooth. So a little bit about my background. This is me when I graduated as an undergraduate, and it seemed cool to wear cutoff shorts. Maybe not so much. I studied computer science. This is in Montreal. I went to Concordia University there, and then I did a master's degree at University of Waterloo. I remember the summer. That photo on the left was the summer between undergraduate and graduate school, and for fun, I was reading books about compiler design. I thought that was a pretty cool thing. So Waterloo is kind of, it's like the Stanford or MIT of Canada. It's a pretty heavy-duty engineering computer science school. At the time, computer science and the stuff I was interested in was a really obscure corner of the world. I remember, nobody I knew about microcomputers or PCs. It just wasn't interesting to very many people. And even at the university I was at, nobody had any interest in this. And one of the things I did when I was in university, I took a course in compilers, which is creating programming languages and stuff like that. And I'm an okay programmer, but in the course of a 13-week semester, you had to create a Pascal compiler that generated VAX assembly language, and we wrote it in C in 13 weeks. And I didn't know VAX assembly language, and I didn't know C when we started the course. So it's a pretty heavy-duty thing. And what I found is, I was teamed up with 2 other guys, and one of them was a much better programmer than I was, and hardworking. One of them was a better programmer than I was, but a complete slacker. And then there was me. And so I wrote, a good chunk of code, but what I focused on was something that nobody else really cared about. which is we had to do presentations in class and write up a project plan and present it and think about user design and why are we doing those things. And I just started gravitating towards those things. Because I knew that there were other people who were better programmers than I was. But I thought, this is kind of cool. And then I learned that there was this role in the industry called product management. I thought, that sounds cool. That's the thing that I'm interested in. Because again, like in university, I'm in the libraries, you know, on the weekends reading Computer World magazine and stuff like that. It's not a good way to meet women, I'll say that much. Okay, so, and I worked in a couple of companies, but I eventually found my way to a first startup company. I was working at a university in New York, and I think I cold called this company called the Whitewater Group, which was in Evanston, Illinois. And it was operated out of an incubator, not unlike this, a little smaller scale. And I think there were about 10 employees, or maybe 6 or 7 employees at the time. And I cold called the CEO, and I think I probably did that by sending a letter. You remember what letters are? Or filling out a bingo card. And this photo was actually taken 10 years later at a reunion of some sorts. But it was a startup company, and I so wanted to get into the software industry. I'd been applying to companies like Microsoft and Lotus and all these companies that I thought were cool, and I couldn't get anywhere. I thought, if I can't find my way to a startup company, I'm going to have to go do an MBA, which I didn't really want to do because I thought it's probably not that much fun. So I found my way to the startup company. I moved to Chicago in the middle of the winter. It was the coldest friggin' winter I'd ever had in my life. And then we created what was the first object-oriented programming language for Windows. And it's just a small company. And at the time, like, Windows was pretty obscure. There weren't that many products for Windows, and there were no programming languages for Windows. So the two guys on the left in that photo were the founders. And eventually, I started teaching a class in this stuff for them, and then I eventually became a product manager. But the key lesson was, as a small company, we could actually go out there and be thought leaders in this space. Because nobody knew anything about Windows programming. Nobody knew anything about object-oriented programming. I'm 24 years old, and I was out there giving seminars and teaching and speaking at conferences and writing articles in magazines about this stuff. And people thought, wow, those guys must know what they're doing. Which we didn't, but we knew more than other people. So when there's a new technology, like, you don't have to be that advanced to be an expert. Then that was a small company. It was eventually, kind of plateaued. And then I got recruited by a company that was actually sort of a customer of ours. We licensed some technology to a larger company called Borland. Is anyone familiar with Borland? Okay, it's kind of old people know about it now, right? I used to be the youngest guy in all the meetings. It's not that way anymore. So I moved to California. I worked for Borland. I was a product manager there. That was kind of fun to move out there. It was a bigger company at the time. It was about 2,000 to 3,000 people. And I worked with a guy named Anders Heilsberg. He was the guy who wrote Turbo Pascal, and he later became the chief architect of C# at Microsoft. Super smart guy. He's like one of the top 10 programmers in the universe, I would say. And at some point in the company, they saw, the execs saw this trend of client-server computing is happening. And they looked around at all their products in their portfolio and said, well, could this product be our product in client-server? No. This one? No. This one? No. And eventually, I put up my hand and said, well, we could do it. Me and Anders and another guy, Gary, we were the Turbo Pascal team. We said, we'll sign up for this mission. We don't know anything about client-server. I don't know what it means. I think it has something to do with having a database. But this was, again, another wave in computing that was happening. And I kind of we'd been successful for a couple of years. We had a good product line. Anders was a super smart guy. And I remember we thought at the time, well, maybe it'll take us about a year to build this product. And Philippe Kahn, who was the CEO at the time, gave us some time to build this thing. It took us 2 years. But when we finally shipped Delphi, it was doing $70 million in its first year of revenue. And it kind of saved the company, because the company had some ups, and it had ups, and then it had some downs. And again, it was kind of interesting to just step forward and say, we will take on this mission. And it's not because we wanted to do it. It's because we felt, one, it was important for the company, and two, it was an opportunity for us to do something that was pretty cool. So that was kind of a fun thing. I will say, I learned a hell of a lot more in the downturn working at that company than you learn in the good times. Because it's during those hard times, that's when you learn the lessons of how to make decisions quickly and make sure the company is going to survive. So then one of the things I do, and I read a book recently, a very short book called The Dip. Does anyone know that? Seth Godin? Yeah, it's kind of a cool book. You could read it in like 2 hours, or I'll just tell you the whole story. It's about thinking when you should quit something. And I always had this thing when I would be in a company or a project, I try to imagine in advance, when do I know it's time to leave? Because when a company is really going through a lot of difficulties and you're emotionally in all this drama, it's hard to be objective. So I would always decide in advance, okay, if this happens, this happens, this happens, then it's time for me to go. And so I kind of made that list at Borland, and then I said, okay, it's time for me to go because I didn't think we'd be able to turn around the company successfully. And I joined a startup company called Active Software. It was in a somewhat boring enterprise area called Enterprise Application Integration. And this was like 1998, 1999, and all these companies were doing pretty rapid growth. And I think it was doing about $10 or $12 million in revenue. And we grew it to about 100, actually ultimately 200 million in revenue. Did an IPO that was in the Wall Street Journal. That was kind of cool. But I found, for me personally, enterprise software, not that exciting. Like this was during a time of a lot of .com BS going on. This was a real company with a real product and real customers. So it wasn't some eyeballs kind of thing. But we grew it. We had a successful IPO. At some stage, it was worth $3 billion. Later, it wasn't worth quite that much, but it was still worth over $1 billion. And we merged into another company called Web Methods. And that was kind of an East Coast high-flying company. So for me personally, I realized, it's important that I feel some connection to the people who actually use our product. Because at Borland, we were selling to developers, and I really like that. I worked for 2 other startups that weren't so exciting. They don't even get slides. So they were the $0 billion exits. Because they're not all home runs, right? But anyways, I was in one company that wasn't really succeeding. And people liked their technology, but they kept saying, look, we just don't have budget. So we're going with this open source thing. Java struts and JBoss and stuff like that. And I realized there were 3 big trends at this time. And I thought, the enterprise software industry is going to be redefined. And you won't be able to create a traditional enterprise software company anymore. It didn't mean Oracle or SAP or Siebel were in trouble, but it meant new companies would be in trouble. They could not follow the playbook of the past. And so I said, I want to be a part of the new stuff. Open source, cloud, and what I saw as a trend towards globalization. And then I got a call from a recruiter to join MySQL. And I thought, well, that seems like a kind of a cool thing. It's open source. It's from Scandinavia. It's completely distributed. And, it's powering a lot of cloud companies. So I became the first VP from Silicon Valley in that company as they moved the CEO to Silicon Valley. And we were competing against, Oracle, IBM DB2, Microsoft SQL Server, companies that were 3 or 4 or 5 orders of magnitude larger than we were. But we could do something that they couldn't do, which was these were very expensive products, good at enterprise workloads, and we were a dirt cheap, free product that was really good for web workloads. And it's sort of funny because at the time, nobody cared about web development whatsoever. Oracle, Microsoft, they're like, yeah, we don't care about that. We just care about the big applications. So we grew that. There were some ups and downs in that process. I grew long hair because my mother died and I wanted to donate the hair. But I feel like I look cool for about a couple of weeks. That's me with Jonathan Schwartz, who was the CEO of Sun. He had a ponytail. It's not a good look for anybody. And we did a video broadcast to all the employees in the company. I look a little stunned in the photo because I just all three of us had just done vodka shots because I felt that was an important part of our culture at MySQL. So, and the picture on the lower right is what's called a negative sauna. Does anyone know what a negative sauna is? Yeah, I heard somebody say it. So a sauna gets hot, a negative sauna gets very cold. So I'm in there with the founders of MySQL, and it goes to negative 110 Celsius. It's pretty cold. You don't want to get stuck in that room for long. And yeah, maybe looks a little bit awkward to be in with those guys. Okay, so then after MySQL, I got a lot of calls to go join the next open source database company, to go be CEO of, CouchDB. No, that's a crappy company. MongoDB. Well, that one actually turned out pretty good. I don't have any regrets about it, but it's like, wow, one time I did the math on that, and it's like, oh, that would have been cool. A whole bunch of other open source companies, DataStax, I became an advisor. MuleSoft, that's another one I turned down. No regrets. But I wanted to be doing something different. Because, when you get calls from recruiters, they want you to do the same thing you just did. And I just spent, like 5 or 6 years in open source crazy land, building databases and stuff, and I thought, I want to do something new. So I wanted to be in the cloud, in SaaS, and so I joined this little company called Zendesk, and I think it was about 17 employees at the time. They just received funding from Benchmark, and I knew one of the board members, and to be honest, I think the company had screwed up some of their sales and marketing, and so they were looking to put somebody in who could help prevent them from screwing up further, and I got the job. And at the time, I recruited a couple of people I'd worked with, and you're trying to bring in people and be honest with them and saying, look, if we really do this right, maybe, fingers crossed, this could be worth 500 million. And as I say, it's like, well, I sure hope this thing doesn't turn me into a liar. And sometime later, it's like $5.5 billion. So you can't always predict which ones will be successful. But what I knew was this was a new category of software, and people would move to the cloud. And again, there's a little bit of disruption. I'll come back to this later. And that's Mikkel, the CEO, with the hard hat, as we moved into a new office in San Francisco. That guy in the middle is Ed Lee, who was the mayor of San Francisco. He passed away last year, which was sad. So it was a remarkable growth, growing that to 100 million and beyond. I would tell people in this kind of high growth environment, every 9 to 12 months, it's a new company. And when you recruit people into that environment, they have to know that their job is going to change. Everything is going to change. And this is one of the ironies of building a high growth company, is you're trying to make it change. And you get to a certain size and then you say, it's not the same as it used to be. Of course not. At some point, it becomes a big company. And that's usually when I say, okay, it's less interesting for me personally. And then, my wife is from Michigan, and I always told her anytime she wanted to move back to Michigan for family, I would do that, secretly hoping it would never happen. But one day she said, no, her dad was 86 or 85, and he was a widower. And I love Michigan. I grew up in Montreal, so it's not that dissimilar in terms of weather and culture and stuff like that. So I joined, and I wanted to be in the security industry because I felt like the internet is so important that we have to protect our personal information and help protect companies. And so I kind of connected with Doug one time when he was in San Francisco through some investors, and I joined the company somewhere around here, and then it grew up to 100 million and stuff. And in the early stage of the company, it's not like everything was working right. Like any rock you looked under, you'd say, well, this isn't good, this isn't good, this isn't good, this needs improvement. But the most fundamental thing you could see is, wow, the people who use this product, they really love it. Very high loyalty from the customers, and people were passionate about it. And Doug and John really figured out a use case that was interesting. The idea of like two-factor authentication was not new. That was an old, boring category. But putting it on a mobile device, that was new. That was the twist. And they were very, very smart about how they built that product with a new adoption curve that was coming. So that was fun. Eventually I was running marketing, sales, product, engineering, support services. So about 3/4 of the company. So let's talk about what the common elements are. So for me, what I found is the companies that were successful had a very large total available market. Like database, it's a big market. Security is a big market. Secondly, they have lots of old vendors, incumbents, who are complacent. And does anyone work for a big company? It's okay, we're among friends, you can put up your hand. Big companies are all about preserving the status quo. So if you're competing in a big market and the competition is trying to preserve things, you have the opportunity to do the opposite, which is to disrupt it. Especially if there's a platform change. Windows, client server, web, mobile. I don't know if Bitcoin or blockchain is disruptive, but maybe it is. And then you can develop a disruptive strategy. The term disruption gets thrown around a lot. Does anyone watch HBO Silicon Valley? Yeah. It's sort of a comedy, it's sort of a documentary. Like it's a little bit too close to the truth. And in that show, they always talk about kind of disruption and stuff, and people throw it around in a way that's kind of meaningless. But it actually means something very important. And the easiest way to think of it is, disruption is an inferior solution for an unattractive market that changes the game. So disruptive companies aren't necessarily building better products. They're better for a certain audience. And a lot of this comes from a book called The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. You don't have to buy the book, but it's an important concept to understand. And sometimes they show a diagram that shows, like, here's what customers want. And the big vendors, over time, big vendors focus on their biggest customers and their highest margin accounts. So when the big customers say, hey, can you add this feature? Can you add that thing? They keep adding to it. And the more they add to it, the more they concentrate their business among big customers who want more of the same. And in so doing, they kind of sometimes make it too complicated for the lower portions of the market. So if you think of the market as a pyramid, the top of it is your Fortune 500, then you say maybe mid-market, SMB, very small business. Disruption can occur from the bottom when you create a product that is for the people who decide to stay out of the market, the underserved. At MySQL, we weren't selling head-to-head against Oracle. We were selling to people who could not afford Oracle. At Duo, we weren't selling to people who already had RSA. We were selling to people who were like, I don't know what I need for security. Tell me what I should buy. They weren't trying to compare us to other things. So the formal definition is like, and Uber, Craigslist, these are examples of different disruptive things. First of all, to be disruptive, there has to be a market. You may have a new cool thing, and you may want to pioneer a market. That's a very tough thing to do. If there is a market where people are already spending money, that's a good sign to be disruptive. Two, there has to be people who are underserved. They choose not to buy anything. If only it was easier or cheaper or they understood what they were doing. But they choose not to buy from the incumbents. And this is the magic of disruption. If you're selling to the underserved market who are not buying from the incumbents, you don't have to be better than the incumbents. What do you have to be better than? Somebody said something. What do you have to be better than? You have to be better than nothing. Because that's their alternative. They're not doing anything. When we used to sell Zendesk, we weren't competing against RightNow or Oracle or Siebel or any of those legacy products. We were competing against spreadsheets, shared email inboxes. So we didn't have to build all the features. We just had to build a couple of things that were useful to them. And it's hard sometimes for engineers to wrap their head around this, because if you try to compare yourself to the big guys, you say like, well, we can never compete, which is actually true. So you have to think about your specific market. And generally speaking, if you're disruptive, you're probably disrupting everybody in the industry. So the good news, though, is when you are disrupting an industry, the big companies, they don't pay any attention to you, because they never hear your name come up, because their customers are not interested in that stuff. No CIO at a Fortune 1000 company was going to go to their Oracle rep and say, hey, you know, on the weekend I downloaded this free thing. They don't do that stuff. They're writing tens of millions of dollars checks to Oracle and others, and they don't have any visibility into this. So you can fly, if you're lucky, you get a year or two under the radar before the big companies even know what's going on. So there's a couple of implications for this. The incumbents, that's the big vendors, they're going to act rationally, and they're going to try to protect their existing business. And so if you know what they're going to do, you can kind of anticipate the competitive strategy, and you can try to stay a move or two ahead. There will be a point where they come after you, but usually you have a long runway during which they're just saying, oh, MySQL, oh, that's a toy. Nobody I know uses that. Security in the cloud? Oh, no. Nobody would put their security products in the cloud. Until one day, everybody puts their security products in the cloud. We're not at that day yet, but it will come. And again, the last point is, because something is new, it doesn't make it disruptive. Or because something is better, doesn't make it disruptive. It's usually that it's worse when judged by the mainstream criteria. I'd be hard-pressed to explain to my dad that Airbnb is better than staying at a hotel. He just would not view it that way. We're going to stay in somebody's house. Maybe they'll clean the sheets. Maybe they won't. Right? It's weird by the old framework. If anyone wants to tweet, like, this is a good slide to tweet. Okay, so the important point in disruption is to understand which side of the innovation equation are you on. If you're in a big company, you do what's known as sustained innovation or incremental improvement. It makes things better by the existing criteria. And if you're a startup doing that, you don't have a very long runway. Because eventually the big companies will say, well, they made it twice as fast? Yeah, we could do that. We're slow. It'll take us a while to get our act together, but they can make it, a little bit better over time and compress your value. So when you're disruptive, you really have to think about, how do I change the rules? Not for everybody, but for the underserved market. So again, like Netflix versus cable. The traditional criteria is very different. And over time, Netflix became this thing that was kind of an unstoppable force. And actually, Netflix is a really interesting one, because they're one of few companies that actually disrupted twice. So they disrupted the old Blockbuster rental model, and then they disrupted that model, again, sort of a second time for streaming. Okay, when you're disruptive, you can actually disrupt on a whole bunch of different ways. The most disruptive and successful companies disrupt on every criteria. Meaning, you don't try to build an enterprise traditional product, but sell it online. You try to do everything a little bit different. This was one of the other co-founders of MySQL, and we had this photo moment. He was in the Stockholm Harbor, and can you guess whose boat that is behind him? No, Larry Ellison's boat. Like, you have to sell a lot of databases to have a boat that big, right? So, okay, so one thing to be careful of, if you're trying to be disruptive, you don't want to play by the incumbent's rules. So, if they're going head-to-head, field enterprise sales force, lots of services, you kind of have to think, how do I do the opposite of what they're doing? They're putting every single feature they can in there. What's the opposite of that strategy? And if you compare the strategy, for example, of Duo versus RSA, or MySQL versus Oracle, is kind of amazing how much it is the polar opposite of the incumbents. Now, there's lots of ways to be successful in business. This is only one way. If you do have the good luck to identify a disruptive opportunity, try to be as disruptive as possible. And if you're in a big company, the key thing to be careful of, don't try to judge the new disruptive business or put it through the same processes that you put a mature business through. And this is why sometimes when big companies acquire small companies, sometimes they destroy it because they end up changing all of the things that made it disruptive. So just to summarize, when I grew up in Montreal, and I was a Cub Scout, and then I was a Boy Scout. And I don't know if they do this in the US, but we had an expression, dib, 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 dob, dob, dob. It means do your best, do our best. And I actually think, well, it's a pretty good philosophy of life. You know, work creatively with people you like on hard problems that have never been solved before. Like, who doesn't want to do that? But who does that? And so I hope that everyone here will think about that and say, you know, am I really doing all these things that I can, that are my potential? Because it's a lot of fun when you get to do something like that, when you can really create and it's in business or elsewhere. Because like in my spare time, a couple of years ago, I wrote a rock opera. It's free. It was the world's first open source rock opera. You can download it free, yeah. So I try to be creative and work on fun problems. So hopefully we have a few minutes for questions, yeah? Go ahead.